Hello and welcome to the Game Theory Podcast. I'm your host, Sam Vecenie. We are presented by CLNS Media. Today on the show, we've got good friend of the program, Danny Leroux, on. We're going to talk about All-Star Weekend. We're going to talk about basketball without borders. Danny and I have basically spent the entire goddamn weekend together, so I felt like it would only be apropos to have a podcast on Monday following All-Star Weekend, talking about some of the different things that we saw. For reference, here's what we're going to run down. We're going to run down basketball without borders in the second half, because that's a really interesting event that I don't think a lot of people necessarily have access to. Then we're going to run down in the first half, Rising Stars, All-Star Saturday, the All-Star game itself, which I watched this morning. Danny and I actually went to go see Black Panther last night. So did you get to see the All-Star game at all this morning, Danny?
I did not, but I kept pretty decent tabs on it and all that kind of stuff. So I feel comfortable talking about it in loose terms, but you can take the lead with that. If you want to talk about Black Panther, of course, we could do that as well.
Yeah, maybe we'll talk about Black Panther at the end so people can kind of tune out at the end and make their own choices on if they want to be spoiled or if they want to hear it actually be discussed. So let's start with just the overall feel of All-Star Weekend here out in LA. How did you feel about the All-Star Weekend being out here and some of the events that we saw over the course of the weekend?
Well, I think you're trying to strike a balance, because I think for the players and, a lot of the people who are around, LA is a wonderful place for All-Star because it's nice weather relative to most of the country for this time of year. There's a lot to do. It's a very easy place for social things because so many entities are already based out here, so It fits in with that. The downsides are it can sometimes affect the quality of play because the quality of the other kind of play is so good. Sometimes that spills over. And it's LA, as you know, and many listeners probably know, is a very spread out city. So for those sort of logistics, there are elements that are better when it's a smaller area, and so it's all in the same place. But for the stuff itself, I think that generally speaking, the events were a little bit worse. I think the atmosphere was definitely weaker because it was a crowd that, wasn't as into it. That this sort of a spectacle isn't as special because cool things happen in LA a lot.
Yeah.
And it's also a very corporate crowd. I'm guessing it's a higher shift in that when it's in LA just because there are a lot of people that are around. So I thought like the atmosphere for the dunk contest in particular was not great, but it was still, I think that doesn't add as much to it. It's more the quality of what's on the court rather than the crowd itself.
Yeah, and I think that's a really great point because not only were the fans not really there early on All-Star Saturday, but it was definitely more of a corporate crowd because as you and I looked up while we were sitting in the press box, like tickets for this thing were insane. They priced out so many people by like just through sheer numbers of what they were asking for price-wise, even on the secondary market. What was the cheapest get-in? The cheapest get-in was like $1,000, right?
Yeah, that was for the game itself, but because I checked it too late to see it for the stuff, but I'm guessing it was high for All-Star Saturday night as well, and that just narrows it out, and it's a challenge, and there were certainly some fun things about it, but you're going to always kind of have that dynamic, and the ideal feel for it would be more to make it an accessible event, but when you have something that is intriguing and that is in demand, the price is going to be whatever the market will bear for it. And the problem in a place like LA is that there are so many people that want to do everything that they can drive up the price, supply and demand.
Yeah, no question there. But it does create that more corporate crowd, I think, as you mentioned, because, as people know, LA is almost certainly one of the bigger have/have-not cities from a, economic poverty standpoint, that it can definitely price out some people that would prefer to go, right?
Right, and I think that was true also. Like, you could think a good crowd could really elevate something like the Rising Stars game as well, because if they're really into it, it is a fun opportunity to see those guys in a different setting. I mean, all of them are playing with better surrounding talent than, like, not all of them are playing better. I was thinking of the Kings guys. A lot of guys are playing with at least different surrounding talent and a more open setting for sure, because it's hard to get more open than the rookie-sophomore game. So I think that there are certain people, like basketball lifers or people who just like it, that would really enjoy that. But when it becomes a more expensive thing, not due to anybody's fault, that's just the nature of the beast, then you lose that feel. And I mean, the crowd was pretty sparse throughout, but was pretty sparse in the beginning, especially of that game. And so it changed the atmosphere. I mean, I think that part of the reason the players weren't as enthusiastic about defense was it's a break and they're trying to do all that, but also they weren't really getting egged on by the crowd, and the crowd was more into it for the All-Star game itself.
Yeah, and you mentioned Rising Stars. Let's just start there. I watched this game on TV. My girlfriend was a little bit sick on Thursday, Friday, and a little bit into Saturday, so I decided to stay home instead of going to the Rising Stars game. You mentioned the atmosphere there. I kind of want to talk about the players. I mean, Bogdan Bogdanovic wins MVP, but the guy I think that stood out most to me was Jaylen Brown.
Yeah, I mean, Jaylen Brown, talented athlete, really active, and I think that was one of the big differences in this game was the guys who worked hard, and he worked hard off the ball, including and they were looking for him on lobs, and yeah, I thought he did a nice job. Nobody really cared about defense, so it's not like, oh, he stood out on the defensive end, but yeah, I thought he was active, and it was fun to see him in a less orderly, let's call it a less orderly setting, because his energy worked well in that format, and the guys were looking for him.
Yeah, I mean, every single dunk that he threw down just seemed to be so violent. Like, he just wanted to break the rim off every single time. And that matters. Like, that creates a better atmosphere. He tries to go between the legs and pulls it off. Like, that stuff is awesome. That dunk he pulled off was probably better than, every dunk but two that we saw in the dunk contest, right?
Yeah, somewhere in that range, like 2 to 4, because there were some good Donovan Mitchell ones, even though he was my favorite. We'll get into that later. But yeah, I thought it was good for him. I also thought Buddy Hield played with a lot of energy, and that made a difference because like there were a couple times where he got like steals in the backcourt, which were basically some of the only ones that really happened in the game, because he just he saw a lazy pass and just got his hand out there and took a shot, and it was. I thought one of the big differences was that the world team moved the ball more, and so that just allowed their guys to get in better circumstances. The U.S. team was very comfortable. I mean, you could see this criticism at different levels of international ball, even at various moments in time, that the U.S. team was like, hey, it's a fun game. My idea of fun is I'm going to pull up and take a shot, whereas the world team was like, hey, let's pass the ball to somebody who's open and get an easy shot. And they also chucked. I mean, Bogdan took some absolutely amazing shots that went in, but I mean it's the Rising Stars game. That's not a big deal. And so like he pulled up from, I would say there was one that was like pulled up from 29, and he made it. I mean it was a beautiful shot, and so it's fun for that, and I'm sure it means a lot to the players. I mean that even though the crowd was more sparse than I would have liked, it's still a big stage for them. It's a game that's on national TV, all that kind of stuff. And so yeah, I was excited for Brown, and the Kings guys I thought both played well. Bogdan won MVP, but Hield had some moments where he was more dominant than anybody, but that's just because he took more shots.
Yeah, the Bogdan experience was in full in every single way that you mentioned, because he pulled up from like 30 feet, 35 feet that one time and knocked it down. And then he also committed like a Euro foul out on a fast break, and the fans literally booed him, and you could hear it through the TV because they were. Kevin Pelton
gave him a B in his player grade solely because that was so antithetical to the idea of an exhibition game. It was great.
Like, it's just amazing that he did that. Like, what are you doing? Another guy that didn't get a whole lot of publicity, I didn't think, but was awesome in that game, was Jamal Murray. I mean, he won MVP last year, so this is a format that really, really shows well for him. But he dropped like 21, 7, and 6, and was very noticeable throughout everything, just from making plays for others, knocking down threes. He was really good, I thought. It's
a setting that is very, very good for him because it's more open. His handle is good, and he has the threat of pulling up, so teams, like when they wanted to play defense and make choices, he can make a decision that's hard for them. And I thought he looked really good. I've been a Jamal Murray believer for a ridiculously long time. And this isn't the game that you point to say, hey, Jamal Murray can play. But it's a good reminder of, like, in these times, you get to see different elements of guys' skill sets. And I thought he made some nice passes, and then his handle and his shot. And I thought he looked good as well.
Yeah, and it's probably worth mentioning some of the other Team USA guys, I guess. Like we mentioned Jaylen Brown. Jaylen Brown was, I thought, the best guy on the floor. John Collins was good. John Collins had that disgusting dunk from the Donovan Mitchell pass at the end of the game where he just cocked it all the way back and then threw it down. Jason Tatum, I thought, was pretty good. I think he had a couple of really nice windmill dunks. He had, 13 points, 16 points, something like that. He was solid. I enjoyed him. I think he showed off a little bit more athleticism than he gets to show off in Boston.
Yeah, I was amused just because I thought the team setting actually hurt him a little bit just because the quality of shots he was getting other than the dunks was a little bit worse, but he looked good. I like Jason in that setting. I enjoyed him. I thought he did a nice job of, again, playing with energy and doing what the team needed out there, even though they did end up getting just worked by the world team. I can't even remember the final score. It was a lot to less than that. But
yeah, it was like 20 points or something like that.
Yeah, it was fun, and I think a lot of the guys just looked good out there. And you said Collins, yeah, he had that really nasty dunk in there, and that's what you really want from the game. It seemed like the guys were enjoying themselves out there. And the other reason why I expected the world team to win was beyond the idea that they had more capable passers, was that if it was going to become a pull-up shooting contest or just a catch and shoot, their guys were better, and that wasn't a surprise. I mean, De'Aaron Fox is a talented guy. You and I both like him moving forward, but that's not the strength in his game. And he's not
Chris Dunn.
Yeah, Chris Dunn. They're not D'ing up guys, in an exhibition game. They're not D'ing up guys at half court. So some of their strengths dissipated and some of their weaknesses were accentuated. So that's not a damning criticism or anything like that, because you don't decide regular season games or championships through exhibition game feel. So I was fine with it from that standpoint. And then the World guys, they moved the ball a little better. It was also fun to see the three. They didn't play much together because Embiid didn't play much at all in the game. But
yeah,
I enjoyed the Sixers guys. I thought they brought a little bit of juice in it. Sharch had some nice plays, and Embiid, he stands out in that setting. And then, of course, on Sunday, when he exerts himself, I mean, he's just such a special talent. And I think, the idea of Embiid and what he can be in those types of things, even though I think it was like 10 minutes that he played, you knew when he was out there every second he was out there.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. The Sixers guys was the point I wanted to make last. I mean, Ben Simmons dropped like 13 assists. He was looking more for others than himself. That was great to see. You need someone like that in a setting like this, I think, to really get the most out of it. Someone with incredible vision who can grab and go on the break and create for others, either via three or via lobs. It's a really, really fun atmosphere if you have guys who can do that. Jamal Murray's another guy who is pretty good at doing that because he's a good rebounder for a guard and he has great vision in the open floor. Beyond that, I would say that there was, this was just another game, I guess. Like it was a relatively non-notable rookie sophomore game, probably.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and it was fun. I mean, you enjoy it for what it is, but it wasn't exactly competitive in that way, and so yeah, I mean that led into what was I guess you could say decidedly mixed Saturday night. I mean, there were certain things that were pretty remarkable, but then there was a lot of unremarkable in between.
Yeah, I would say that Saturday night, and we can move into that now, was just not great. That was the first time I'd ever done an All-Star Saturday, and the arena feel was very strange, and the lack of energy from the fans was notable, as well as the performances from the players were relatively on the downside, except for a few spectacular moments. Like Paul George scored like 5 points in a 3-point contest. Like who else was real? I'm trying to think like who was good in the 3-point contest outside of Devin Booker and Klay Thompson. There wasn't really anyone who stood out. I mean,
I remember Tobias Harris was pretty early on in the first round, and he put up, I think, 17. And we're like, oh, that's not bad. It's also, I still got trouble calibrating with the Moneyball rack because
right.
I grew up with it before that existed. And so you see 17, you're like, oh, that's a pretty good score. And it's not bad, of course. But then you're like, oh, and then you have all these guys like Brad Beal and Kyle Lowry that that you think, oh, they could put up a number, and then they didn't, and then eventually Clay got in, and so yeah, I mean, you had it, and so for the 3-point contest, I mean, I think really what was special about it was the final, and it was, I mean, Devin Booker just caught fire and was nailing everything, and he had that run where he's just hitting everything in a row, and put up a number, and again, it's hard to calibrate it. It was 27 is what he ended up with, right?
28, I think.
28. Yeah, oh yeah, and then Clay was close to that. And it's out of 32 now, so it's not exactly the same thing, but he was spectacular. And it's hard with that because it's, that was spectacular, but it was 1 minute, and it's not really a highlight thing. It's just like you remember, oh man, he was hitting every shot. It doesn't resonate necessarily in the same way. And then it was fun because then Clay was behind him in time and got close. He put up a really nice number that would win most years. And I think he got close to what was the previous record in this format. But Devin Booker was just incandescent and beat him.
Yeah, and the other thing with, the feel of the event there is that everything happens in essentially 30-second to 1 minute increments, right? So when you're sitting there and you run through skills challenges take like 30 seconds or something like that. So you run through one, take a minute break, run through another, take a minute break. You're talking about like 7 minutes of time on the court and then commercial. And then with 3-point contest, you're talking about, they go 4 and then take a commercial break. So 4 minutes of court time and then a commercial break. 4 minutes of court time, then commercial break. 3 minutes of court time and then a commercial break. It's stop-starty in a way that I don't know if you get that feel on TV as much as you do in person, right?
Yeah, it's strange because there's just the amount of kind of filler time in the early stuff in particular. I mean, with the skills challenge, it's like, okay, you do these 2 short runs and then you take a commercial. Yep. And then you do 2 more short runs and then you take a commercial. So you're just sitting there going, okay. And but still, because now it's down to 3 events as opposed to when it used to be 4 with the shooting stars, which also added a more variable time element. There was a lot of that, but then I thought it moved pretty quickly after that. I mean, the 3-point contest, even shooting on one basket, because there are, the 8 competitors, I thought they moved pretty quickly. And then the dunk contest, partially due to the restriction now that you can only have 3 attempts per round, that moved really quickly as well.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, we saw a friend of the program here, Robbie Calland, after the event, and he was like, "Whoo boy, it's 7:22 and we're already done with this event." Like, it was just so quickly over that it's set up like for people to go out later that night, but also it was just it was almost too quick, it felt like. And I think that we should move on to the dunk contest now, because that was probably the most notable thing of the evening. I mean, you can maybe make the case that Devin Booker dropping 28 was, but I was disappointed in the dunk contest for, I think, even more so than you were. You actually enjoyed a lot of Donovan Mitchell's dunks. I was a little bit lower on them. I thought that they were all very solid. They were consistent. They were, I think he made them all on the first attempt, right?
Yeah, I think there was one where he messed up the throw, but in terms of the actual try itself, and I think what I would say is the biggest criticism of it was that a lot of the dunks weren't particularly ambitious. I'm sure there were people. I think there was a good piece, I can't remember who wrote it, about the idea. Oh, it was, I think, Golver, that there was too much retro in it, and I agree with that. And the other part of it, there weren't that many dunks where you're sitting there going oh wow, I can't believe how they thought of that, or oh, that's a really interesting idea. And sometimes those miss, sometimes those are disappointments. But you didn't see that much of to me the most ambitious dunk was the one that Dennis Smith hit, his second dunk, where you're sitting there with his height and it just popped. It's like, oh wow, and the other one being Larry Nance's, the double tap as we called it. I think that's kind of what it's being called generally. And those two is okay, that's something. It's partially different. It's also really hard. Whereas Donovan Mitchell's, a lot of them we've seen something similar to it. In the case of his last dunk, we've seen something superior to it and similar to it, and that was hard. So he did the dunk off the other backboard, which is cool. But I remember eons ago, Josh Smith in the McDonald's dunk contest throwing the ball off the back wall of the arena.
Like Andre Emmett dunk at Texas Tech a few years, or like a decade and a half ago.
So it was an interesting idea, and I thought it was a good execution given the Staples Center format where you can't do that. But you're not sitting there going, "Oh my God, that's so." It was an original execution of a decidedly not original idea, and also on that dunk, what was hard was the difficulty of it was kind of the toss, and that's never what pops in a dunk contest. I mean, there have been guys that have done some really cool stuff with tosses, like when the one with Amari and Nash and all that kind of stuff, but people don't really remember that. Like, that's not, when you think about the incandescent dunk contest things, you don't think, oh wow, what a toss by like Vince Carter or MJ or Neek or something like that. That's just not the way it works. And so that was a challenge. And like the other part of it for me with Nance, that was a challenge, was that like the dunk he did, which was a tribute to his dad, was certainly cool, but it's a dunk that it's hard, but it's a dunk that doesn't look as impressive for a tall guy to do. Like, there are certain dunks that tall guys can do that nobody else can. And I was sitting in a very similar seat to where I was when JaVale got robbed in the 2011 dunk contest when he did the two dunks on two separate baskets and all that sort of thing. There's certain things like that small guys just can't do. And I think that's the great lane. That and like the stuff that Aaron Gordon did, where it just requires so much vertical that small guys could do some of that, but he just did it better. And there wasn't much of that, like using the advantages that you have. I actually like the Dennis Smith dunk was kind of like that. And then the other one that kind of, I think, exemplifies why the dunk contest was a little bit flat was the whole production on Donovan Mitchell's second dunk, where he brought out all these smaller people and had them crouch and dunked over them. And so you're sitting there going like, okay, like, yeah, I guess that did technically make the dunk harder. You had to swing your legs differently, but it didn't create anything. You're just
did he have to?
Yeah, like I mean, I guess he had, and so it's like, you know, dunking over his sister Kevin Hart and Kevin Hart's child, who's almost as big as Kevin Hart. Like, I think that it didn't really add anything to it, and that part of it was kind of like, I guess you call it frustrating in that sense. If it's like, okay, you know, it was like he was more focused on doing something that people would be talking about than doing a cool dunk, and that's all people ever end up talking about.
The dunk contests that resonate the most are the ones with creativity, I think. Just full stop. The ones who live on forever are the ones where, you know, there is something just remarkable that we've never seen before that happens. Zach LaVine, go ahead.
Well, and some point on that is, has a retro dunk ever been something that was memorable? Like, they've won contests before, but the things that when you look back, like Michael Jordan and Dr. J, going even back, and you know, even when it goes far back, it's like David Thompson and stuff. Those guys weren't doing dunks because other people had done them iconically before. They were doing originals. Vince is the classic of this. Like, right. And so sometimes they did dunks that were alterations of things that have been done, because there are only so many ways you can do it. But there was a lot of nostalgia, and when you think about the history of the dunk contest, nostalgia is nice, but it doesn't create them. You want to do things that create their own nostalgia rather than that rely on it themselves. Right,
and a great point there is Zach LaVine and Aaron Gordon, right? Aaron Gordon obviously did these incredible things that no one has really ever seen before. Zach LaVine kind of put his own alteration on, for instance, the Michael Jordan free throw dunk, right? Or the Dr. J free throw dunk, whoever did it first. You know, I don't even remember at this stage. It's such a normal thing that happens now. What he did, though, is he did a windmill from the free throw line. He did between the legs from the free throw line. Like, that stuff is where you get definite points, right? And I would even argue that Aaron Gordon is probably the more memorable of the two, despite the fact that he didn't win that dunk contest, right?
Absolutely, for me. And also, Gordon did cool stuff. Like, the one when he dunked over the mascot was spinning.
It's impossible.
Like, the logistics of that were absolutely incredible. And they were trying to do things that were different. And yeah, I mean, there are guys, I mean, I'm a big James White dunk contest guy, not his NBA one, the ones that he did outside of that.
Right.
And like, he'd done between the legs from the free throw line before. But I don't believe it had ever been done in an NBA dunk contest. And like that there's a striking element of that too. It's the distance and all that kind of stuff. The thing that I did really enjoy, what my favorite kind of like the innovation of it to a point was with the double tap, was that the moment of exploration and realization on that dunk being after the fact was really cool. So basically in the arena, everybody's like, except for the people who were behind the basket, everybody's like, I'm sure something happened here, but I don't know what it was. And it took about 10 seconds for them to show the replay. And Larry Nance was kind of like, watch the replay. And then everyone went crazy. And I thought that was interesting. Like, I don't think it resonated in the same way, but I'm like, hey, that's a different experience. You know, the idea of a dunk that in person you had to appreciate basically in the way that people did it on TV. And it was incredible.
I still think, though, that the Nance dunk was less impressive to me than the Dwight Howard dunk, where Howard threw the ball up, it bounced up, he tapped it off the backboard with his left hand and threw it down with his right hand. That requires even more like dexterity to me than what the Nance dunk did. And it's another kind of nostalgic dunk, right? Even though people like aren't really recognizing it as such in a way. It's, you know, the Donovan Mitchell dunk at the end, I think, is a great example of this too, where, you know, he pulls off the jersey, puts on Vince Carter's jersey, and tries to do the reverse 360 windmill. It's just not as impressive. Like, it's just not nearly as impressive as what Vince did, because A, we'd never seen something like that before, and B, Donovan isn't as capable of the sheer violence and authority that Vince was capable of, just because, you know, Donovan, for many of the reasons he's an excellent player, he's quick, he's shifty, he is explosive as a leaper, but more of a floater almost. You know, Vince Carter was powerful. He was 230 pounds. He was, you know, strong. He was even a little bit longer than what I think Donovan is. And he could bring that ball. His hands are bigger than Donovan's, almost more importantly than anything. He could bring that ball all the way down to his knees and just bring it all the way back up and throw it down and, you know, impact the rim with such incredible strength that it resonates more when that kind of stuff happens. And I think that what that kind of shows in a way is that the guys who are most successful are the guys who tailor dunks to their own physical skill set, right? The guys who are creatively finding an outlet to, you know, use their specific gifts within the dunk contest. Vince Carter doing all of the things that he could do. You know, Dominique using his physical power and strength at the rim. Jordan using the way that he floated in the air from the free throw line. Zach LaVine using the way that he floats through the air to do all kind of crazy, you know, between the leg stuff and the behind the back dunk. And, you know, Jason Richardson, kind of a combination of those two. The guy who I think is probably the most underrated dunker ever is Richardson. And he combines those two things really nicely. What going retro does is it doesn't allow you the space to improvise in a way, right? And I think that that's what matters in a dunk contest.
And it also, when you're going retro for somebody like Vince Carter, who is the best dunker of NBA history, is that you're comparing yourself to somebody who you can never compare to, and that's a fundamental challenge. It's like for when a singer does a Whitney Houston song on one of these singing competition shows. It's like, okay, great example. Unless you do it in a completely different way, that it's like a modern, you know, like a different interpretation, you're always going to be comparing it to the original, and you're not better. You're not better, because if you were better, then you'd be doing your own thing. And
speaking of doing your own thing to a Whitney Houston, you know, famous performance, Fergie. Fergie tried to do her own thing. It did not go well in the national anthem.
No, and I got pained when I realized and remembered that Marvin Gaye's anthem, which is still my personal favorite version that's ever been done, was done at an LA All-Star game. Was the memory of like, oh yeah, so you're moving in those lines. And it's funny how the NBA has, and Fergie is an LA product, so there is that part of it. It's not as weird as Kevin Hart, who's from Philly, doing the player introductions and being Kevin Hart about it. But I mean, there's just so much talent in this city, and you're just kind of sitting there going, why? And you have all that, but I mean, the bigger part for me, rather than the decisions that led to those things, though it was great that they got some of the player reactions, was that it was 41 minutes from when the broadcast started to when the game tipped. And
bad.
there should never be that, especially if, most of that time is not spent, talking about how great the players are, and that's what the game's for. You can do the little introductions. Maybe it's 20 minutes just because you want to have a little walkout for each guy. I get that. That's totally understandable. But not as much of the other stuff. And
you know what? Like I'm even someone who enjoys Kevin Hart. Like I can appreciate Kevin Hart. And I went back and watched some of the intros. I thought some of them were pretty funny. Like the Draymond Green one was hilarious. But yeah, you don't need to be doing that for 20 minutes.
Right. But the good thing about the All-Star game, and I am wondering how this is going to continue, because I like to think about things. I'm kind of a structuralist in terms of, does the players picking teams affect it beyond, did it change the structural incentives? And my answer is no. But for this game, it did. They played harder, they played more defense, and that's a good thing. Basically what a lot of us who've tried to reform All-Star Weekend and advocated for various things have said for years is it's like, well, how do you get the players to try?
Money.
And money is one way. I think changing the format so it's not 5-on-5. Also, just the fact that it's mid-season and the risk of injury, and these players are so valuable now in so many ways. I think there are elements of it that you're never going to get a competitive game. And so that's why I've advocated for 3-on-3 or something like that. But what I
literally want them to just be throwing money down at half court. Like, say, okay, we challenge you to 3-on-3. You create 3-on-3 teams. LeBron James challenges James Harden, throws like $50,000 at center court, and says, "Hey, whoever wins this money."
I also want them. What they should do either on Saturday night or some other point is do that with half court shots, because players actually do that, of making bets of throwing money down, and then whoever makes half. And these guys are actually, people don't understand this. A lot of players in the NBA are actually very good at half-court shots. It's also a reason why they should not count heaves as field goal attempts, because these guys will start making them a lot. But the reason they're not doing it is because it hurts their shooting percentages. And they can do it. I mean, so if they can add that into Saturday night or however they want to do it, for whatever reason, it doesn't happen in the shooting stars. But thankfully, that's gone. But yeah, I thought the game was more competitive, and that's good. But my concern is that I don't think anything big change to make it something different. It was just that for whatever reason, partially probably because of the criticism of last year, they just did more with it.
Well, I bet it was the criticism of last year, but I also do think that picking teams, there was like a sense of pride almost. Like, I think that may have played a small factor in this. Also, Joel Embiid gave a shit. You know what I mean? Just having a guy who's that big and that impactful on both ends of the floor, really caring, that helped. I think that he played one of the biggest impacts in this game, being as competitive and as high level as it was.
Another big one is LeBron James. I mean, LeBron has been the tone setter for Cleveland, and a lot of the criticisms that are well-founded of that team's defensive effort and focus this year should lie at his feet, because that's just who he is their best player. And he brought it in the All-Star game. And that, I think a lot of guys fed off that. That doesn't mean everybody had a good game or everybody, everything like that. But I thought that it did help set the tone. And it's going to be fascinating to see how LeBron makes this transition whenever it happens. I mean, he already turned 33. But when he makes the transition to when he's not the clear cut, or in the conversation at least, for best player in the world. Because right now, he's not my pick for MVP. I had him 4th at the end of January. But if we're having the best player in the world conversation, he's still heavily in that. And he's such a dominant personality, and I mean that in an overwhelmingly positive way, that I wonder what's going to happen when he's still the dominant personality, but he's not the best player. How does his influence go? Because I think he made that game what it was, and I wonder what that's going to be, but I'm going to enjoy it as long as I can.
Yeah, I mean, some other guys that I thought were really good in the All-Star game. I would mention, I thought Russell Westbrook was solid. He didn't live up to some of his other like lofty All-Star game heights, but he was really good. Kyrie, I thought, was pretty solid as well. He didn't shoot efficiently, but he was really looking to get teammates involved, and I think that this was a nice little showcase of his underrated passing ability in a lot of ways. I'm trying to think who else. Andre Drummond had like 14 points, and had
Dame Lillard had some good. Dame Lillard had some good moments.
Yeah, Lillard. I was going to get to Team Stephen next. Lillard was.
Oh, okay. Oh, you were talking more about because there weren't as many guys on Team Stephen that had good games, but there were a couple that absolutely did.
Right. Yeah. No, Lillard was awesome. I thought Lillard was really good. He was probably the best player on that team, don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, I would say Embiid probably.
Yeah, maybe. It's probably true. It's probably right. Embiid, like I said, kind of set the tone in a lot of ways for the game, so I guess that has to count for something. But Lillard was really, really good, and I don't know why they didn't like play him late. That was kind of strange to me.
Well, I'm guessing there were more complicated things at stake, and I mean, it was also that was one of those weird things about Jimmy Butler just not playing. And, I mean, first of all, if it had been almost anybody else, it would have been a bigger deal. But
LA Nightlife is undefeated.
LA Nightlife is undefeated, but there's also this element. I don't think this is what it was, but it's like, God, is Tibbs working his guys that hard that they have to sit out the All-Star? I mean, Towns played, obviously.
Well, but, you know what's worth saying, though? Like, Jimmy Butler has played the most minutes per game so far in the NBA this season. Like, he played, I think, in the last game and played like 40 minutes in the last game.
And they played a lot of close games over the final week. Like they had all these really hard fought games, like the one against the Bulls and all that kind of stuff. And actually, this gets into a small point that I want to make about All-Star Weekend, which is considering it is an exhibition for the fans and of the sport, especially if they move to a 3-on-3. But even with 5-on-5, guys get removed for injury. But I think it should be totally socially acceptable for them to just decline. Like, so they'll be an all-star, but to say, I don't want to play in the game. And I don't think there should be beef with that because, hey, if they want to take a week off of not playing basketball, by all means.
I would like that morally. I don't know if the NBA could do that, just because I think a lot of guys would really like the week.
Well, I'm not saying that they don't have to come to the festivities. I think that there are elements there, especially for representatives for the team. But if they don't want to be in the game, I think that's fine.
Again, I will note, LA Nightlife is undefeated.
Yeah, it's also true. But yeah, I just think, because it's this really hard thing with the All-Star game, and it's different in basketball, just like it is in hockey and football, than baseball, where the sport itself takes something out of you, and there's a much more serious risk of injury. Obviously, there is in baseball, but it's fundamentally different. And so the thing that you need to reconcile is, do you want something that is reflective of what the product is on the floor, or do you just want to say that's not possible? And so, there'll be certain times when it will be. And I mean, my instinct is to just go in a different direction, make it a celebration, because, it's just you can't expect them to bring the same thing because there isn't the incentive in place. And I mean, why? That's kind of the basic point to be. And so, if you're doing it to celebrate great players, to build the brand of the game, that sort of thing. And I know there are some people who want a mid-season tournament or something like that, and that brings in complicated stuff as well because the incentives are in place, and the only way to make those things matter is to have them matter. It's like if they did the equivalent of an FA Cup or something like that, and it's possible. I think that would be interesting, but my instinct would be just to move in a very different direction, make it more a celebration of the league than anything else. And I think there's a way to do it. And fortunately, one of the things that I feel really good about now is that I credit Silver with this to a point, is that there is this attitude of like, hey, let's make this the best we can do it, rather than understanding that it's a cash cow and understanding that, hey, let's just, the way it's been has worked to the extent that it will work. And I don't know that we'll ever get it perfect, but I do think like there's a spirit of experimentation with it.
Yeah, no, I don't think that's unfair at all. And in fact, I think it's probably a nice way to think about things going forward. Let's talk about Basketball Without Borders. Basketball Without Borders, for people who don't know, I should just kind of give you a little rundown on what it is. So they bring in about 40 of the best kids from international countries that were born this year in either the years 2000 or 2001. So a lot of really, really young kids. We're talking 17, 18-year-olds. And Folly Dante's case, he's 16 years old and just turned 16. So it's a lot of really young kids, but it's a lot of kids that NBA executives haven't really gotten a chance to see yet, and it's a good chance for them to get eyes on players early playing against elite level talent from overseas. What was your well, before I do that, I should mention some quick little notes. Charles Bassey won MVP of the event. He is a high schooler here in America from Nigeria. I don't think he should have won MVP, to be honest, but we'll talk about that in a minute. Considered to be a top 5 prospect, certainly in the class of 2019, though. Sekou Doumbouya is a guy from France. He's considered a potential top 10 pick in the 2019 NBA draft. He was probably the most talented kid in attendance, played really, really well throughout the week. The all-stars of the event, Killian Hayes, a couple of Argentine perimeter players whose I have their last names, Farabello and Bolmaro. Both of them were really good. AJ Lawson from Canada, Josh Green from Australia, Joel Parra from Spain, Tyrese Samuel from Canada, Luka Samanic, Sekou Doumbouya, Charles Bassey, and then Folly Dante. There was also a guy from Senegal. I can't remember his name. I have him listed as number 65, but he was like a solid, powerful kid who could move out in space as well and looks like a potential small ball center. What were your impressions, though, of the Basketball Without Borders event from what you saw?
I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a great opportunity to see a lot of these players, especially the ones that are still international. It's hard sometimes with the international distinction because with some of those players, it's where they were born rather than where they live now. But it's still great to get that opportunity. And the best thing, and it's something I like about the Hoop Summit as well, is that it's these guys playing against talented competition. So it's not just in an empty gym, though they are doing some drills and stuff. It's like, okay, they get to actually face some guys. And so the matchups that I enjoyed the most were when, like, Folly Dante and Bassey, where those kind of guys were going up against big physical guys. Like the guy you were talking about, 65, was Biram Faye. I thought that it was good to see that because these types of players who are so physically gifted don't have that many opportunities to really go kind of iron sharpens iron. And one of the things that was so distinctive about Basketball Without Borders this year was how the strength was at the forward spots. And so as, the three, I don't know where Doumbouya is going to end up eventually. To me, he looks like he'll eventually be a 4 as long as he's still growing. But
he's 6'9" already. He has like a 7'2", 7'3" wingspan. Like he's going to be a 4.
He might be able to defend threes, which would be awesome. And so you have that, and the guard play was a little bit more limited. I think part of the logic of that also might be just because the forward guys they're rare, and there are a lot of kind of guards. So maybe they just didn't. They put a lot of resources. I mean, I think there were only like 6 players out of that 40 in the camp that were 6'3" or shorter. So, it's just a lot of bigger dudes. But the skill level of some of them really did stand out, not just to the small guys. Like Killian Hayes, he couldn't make a shot a lot of the time, but his handle is good. His first step is good. He tried on defense. I enjoyed that a lot. And then another guy was like, Samanic, certainly his skill level, like his sense of the court and his sense of where everybody was and spacing and all that was great. And also a guy that you didn't mention that I really enjoyed because he didn't make the All-Star team, but Alexander Balcerowski from Balcerowski. Like he legit 7-footer and just kind of has one of those weird skill sets where he went behind the back once and he threw some really ambitious passes and he has a good jump shot, and I heartily enjoy those type of guys. I did get a chance to see Nikola Jokic in person when he was at that age. And I don't think Balcerowski is nearly as good as Jokic was, but I love guys with unusual skill sets for their size, and he certainly fits that bill.
Yeah, Balcerowski was really interesting. He was fun. He was throwing like behind the head passes. He could actually shoot as well at 7'1". I think he's going to be a really interesting prospect to track going forward. There's some he might even end up being a slightly better Anze Pasechnik kind of guy. That's what I was reminded of when I saw him. both him and Biram Faye are on Gran Canaria's second team right now, so it'll be interesting to kind of see those two guys who are both so markedly different playing basketball potentially together going forward. Let's chat about the two guys that I think were most maybe showered with praise going into the event, and that is Sekou Doumbouya and Luka Samanic. Doumbouya, 17 years old, just turned 17, 6'9", really, really long arms, can handle the ball, can shoot, can pass it out on the break. Really, really good player. Like, he is going to be, I think, a top 10 pick in next year's draft, which is shaping up to be a little bit weaker than what this year's draft is. Neither of these guys are Luka Doncic level prospects, but I think that Doumbouya has a real chance to be like a potential NBA starter down the road.
One of the things I really liked about him was that physically you see somebody who fits in more of like the support player mold, just because a guy who's big and strong like that and can switch. Like, he doesn't have the handle of a dominant scorer, but he has enough of kind of the building blocks of other things that he can become more than that. So his jump shot looked solid to me.
Good release. Good arc on it.
And so, like, with him, you could see if he has the work ethic and all that, and of course you have a more familiarity with that than I do. Like, what I saw with him was a guy like somebody who could use Robert Covington as the jumping off point. And I'm not saying he's going to be as good defensively as Covington is, but that's kind of the ideal on that end. And then offensively, he can do a little bit more. He can do more with the ball in his hands. He can do something like that. And the league always needs players like him. Doumbouya can fit in right now. And Samanic, he's a little bit harder just because defensively, I mean, he seems like one of those guys, and he's not center sized, so he's more of like a 4. And so you're going to need to see how he battles through different things, whether he can switch or not. But I think I'm going to enjoy him as a professional wherever he ends up. I think I'm going to enjoy him a lot. And I'm going to be excited to watch him as he plays against guys who are his age and a little bit older, because there are elements of Samanic that I find absolutely tantalizing. And I just want to see more of it. Yeah,
Samanic was a guy coming into this event that had gotten some publicity as like a potential top 10 pick. He won the MVP of the Next Generation tournament earlier, or within the last like 4 months. I forget exactly what it was. I think it's late December or something like that. Watch some tape from there. You see the skill level immediately stand out. He is just so much more polished than players his age typically are. He just turned 18 years old. He is really, really gifted. I just have no idea where he plays defensively. He is not quick enough to defend 3s and 4s and play out on the perimeter, and he is not big enough to protect the rim. Just full stop. He's going to be a good offensive player wherever he goes. He can handle the ball already. He can attack closeouts. His shot mechanics are really solid, even though shots didn't really fall for him this week. I'm worried about him. Like, I think he's more of like a late first rounder than like a, maybe even probably not a stash guy, because I think he is going to be pretty productive to the point where he's going to be a first round pick whenever he decides to come out. But I am worried about the defense, and I do think that limits his upside going forward.
And the question that you always have with players with his kind of basic skill set is he good enough offensively to justify taking special steps defensively?
Right.
And I remember when we worried about that with Ben Simmons, and the answer was yes, he was special enough offensively, but then he's been way better defensively. The difference is that Simmons had way better physical tools than Samanic does on
That's exactly right. Yep.
And so that trade-off, I mean, you could go in a million different directions with that. I mean, Jimmer Fredette is a good example of that, like just how he, the offensive, but I mean, he also just was a way worse offensive player. And so I don't know what the answer to that was Samanic. And usually the players we've seen with that just aren't his size. So stashing him is a little bit different. And I don't know exactly what he's going to be. I mean, it's going to be hard to figure out. And I am hopeful, though, that we're getting into an age where I think coaching in the NBA is better than it's ever been, where teams are getting better at using guys with unusual strengths and weaknesses, but there are always limitations to it.
Yeah, and I think it's worth bringing up another guy as an interesting kind of counterpoint to Luka Samanic, and that's Paul Eboua. Paul Eboua is a 6'7", 6'8" kind of combo forward with super, super long arms and has a nice fluid shot that looks projectable. He's not super skilled off the bounce yet, but he's quick and he can attack closeouts. He can do a lot of different stuff. He currently plays for Roma over in Italy. He's from Cameroon originally. He looks like kind of more of a modern fit in the NBA than Samanic does to me. And I understand that Samanic certainly is more skilled at this point than he is, but I kind of look at Eboua and I think that guy has a higher ceiling in the NBA than what Samanic does. Just kind of pure and simple if everything goes right with his development over the course of the next few years.
He's definitely a lot more plug and play.
Yeah.
And that is incredibly useful. And Eboua was a good example, so was Doumbouya to a point, of something that I've been really excited to see in the youth, and this has been true for the last couple of years covering youth events, of you're not going to make every guy a Giannis or that type of thing where the ball can be, or Simmons, where the ball can be good in their hands. But the base level of just comfort in those circumstances for a lot of these guys with wing size is just skyrocketing now. I mean, the idea of somebody like, he's making a lot of money, a fair amount of money this year, but like Ben McLemore, like I didn't like Ben McLemore as a prospect because I thought he couldn't dribble. And right. I think we're getting out of those players. I think it was just with the coaching and I mean the fact that these guys are getting encouraged more at internationally, nationally, wherever they are to get more comfortable in that because they realize there's spillover benefits. And you can look at the most successful teams in the NBA right now. Basically every player on those teams needs to have that ability to make a good decision, to create a little bit of separation, even if you're more of an off-ball guy. And Eboua was a great example of that, of like, okay, you're not going to have him run your offense. But if he needs to attack a closeout and make a dribble or two and a good decision, or even ideally get all the way to the basket, I think he'll eventually be able to do that. And if you're 6'7" and can do that, there is a place in the NBA for you as long as you work hard.
Yeah, and another guy that is like 6'5", doesn't look like he has super length, but was one of the youngest players in attendance is Killian Hayes. He's more of like a combo-y guard that has good shot mechanics. I'm not real worried about that, but what I am worried about with him is the athleticism. Like, he is not a overly explosive athlete. And again, like, you do have to hope that he just kind of comes along and brings along that further athleticism going forward. But, he's one of the youngest players in attendance. You have to hope that he continues to grow as he comes along. But I am a little bit concerned there. He does have great vision, does have a really great feel for the game, but there are worries there that I think are going to continue to prop up, especially when you compare him to guys like Josh Green, who's currently at IMG Academy out of Australia, or AJ Lawson out of Canada. Lawson particularly, I think, is a much better long-term prospect than what Killian Hayes is.
I would agree with that. What I liked about Hayes was his vision and patience and his understanding of kind of where guys were going to be. And that pops in this setting because the guys have no familiarity with each other.
Yep.
So if you have anticipation in those sorts of settings, then it's really impressive. And I thought Hayes did that. The challenge is that's not enough to be a good NBA player. I mean, a good example of that, Hayes is a way better athlete than that. But like, think about Teodosic. Like, Teodosic is supernatural. Like, he's basically to the nth degree of that skill, and there's a certain limitation at this point in his career, and there was one even when he was in his prime of what that can be. So you have to have the physical with it, and Hayes is, as I said, a much better athlete than that. But that sort of idea is a concern. And with Josh Green, what I really enjoyed with him is, again, kind of a plug and play idea where he looked good with the ball in his hands, certainly had some burst as a jumper, but worked off ball too and has the size to play. So, like, he's sitting there with him going, okay, he's probably going to be, depending on if he grows from this point, he'll be a two guard. He can be a two guard. Yep. I think he could be definitely successful in college, and I think it's not too big a leap to see him being a player in the NBA. That doesn't mean like, oh, guaranteed starter or anything like that, but shooting guard is less sparse than the three, but still incredibly narrow, and the backup spots at the two get really limited as well. And I mean, that's why we're seeing teams do like what Dallas has, where they're playing 2 point guards because A, they're not getting punished for it. But if there were more capable guys like Josh Green in the league, then you could see teams counter that 2 point guard approach with a guy who could, attack them in different ways.
Yeah, I think that Green was probably one of the 5 best players I saw in attendance at this event.
Yeah, I would say so too.
The best player I thought this weekend was AJ Lawson. He was named to the all-tournament, the all-star team or whatever. I thought he was the best player that I saw there. He's 6'6", 6'7", has actual lead guard skills, has vision. His jump shot is really good. He's grown, he told me after, about 5 inches over the course of the last year. So he had to totally kind of readjust the way his body works in a lot of ways. And I look at him, he looks like a serious, like, high major, maybe one and done kind of guy. Like, he can really, really play due to his creative abilities, his ability to knock down shots, and just the way he plays in the open floor. Athleticism at 6'7" with the ability to play travels, just full stop.
He was interesting. The day I missed, Sunday, was his best day from what I've heard.
Yep.
But he still did look good before that. And I'll make a comment, and I'll say the 2 interpretations of it was that I was surprised to see that he was 6'7", and so there's the good part and the bad part. So the bad part can be for certain guys they don't play to their size, and that's a really bad thing. You know, that can be guys who have a low release in their jump shot, who don't use their physicality or don't use their length defensively. But with him, it was more that he moved like a smaller guy. So you saying that he grew 5 inches in the last year, I think that's a part of it. Like the way he goes through spaces looked more like a 6'4" guy to me. And the fact that he can do that at 6'7" is a very good thing, because we've seen this with these guys, and that's not like, oh, like he's the next Anthony Davis or something like that. Obviously not. But I like guys that were smaller for a period of time and had to figure things out that way because they see the floor a little bit differently. And it's not as much about they handled like a guard, because now, fortunately, we're teaching all these guys how to do that kind of stuff. It's more the idea of just how you interpret space and how you interpret openings is different when you don't have the height advantage. Sometimes guys who are tall get lazy because they can just see over things. But I like that in him, and there's a little bit of shiftiness that I did really enjoy. And so, yeah, I'm gonna be invested in him moving forward. But there were a lot of signs that I liked, and I might have had him as best if I had been there on Sunday.
Yeah, AJ Lawson, it's worth noting, he has offers from like Oregon, Creighton, SMU, all of these, high major schools at this stage. He's a class of 2019 kid. Did an unofficial visit to Kentucky in December, he told me as well. So, that's the kind of like player we're talking about here. Like, he's going to be a super high major kid. Wouldn't surprise me if he's like shooting up recruiting boards sooner rather than later. A couple other guys that I think it's worth talking about too are the 2 guys who are ranked in the top 10 in both of their recruiting classes. One of them won MVP, Charles Bassey. He is a top 5 recruit in the 2019 recruiting class. First time I heard about Charles Bassey, just for a quick story, it was at the Combine in, I think, 2015 or 2016. I was walking into the hotel with Jeff Goodman, and this random dude stops us on the street, like as we're entering into the hotel, and says, "Yo, have you ever heard of Charles Bassey? He's like this 6'11" kid who can handle like a guard and who can like do all this stuff." And he literally pulled up a highlight tape on his phone. And Jeff and I were like, "Oh, holy shit. This guy is like kind of unbelievable." And since then, it seems like he's gotten a little bit better. I'm unclear on if he's gotten a lot better from like the research that I've done on him over the course of the last couple of years. But, 6'11", can really move well laterally, really great length, affects the game inside the paint really well. I am a fan of what I've seen of him. Like I said, would not have named him MVP, but he was certainly one of the best 6 or 7 players in attendance here.
There were a couple situations in the scrimmages where he would just this was a big, heavy forward, big, heavy group where he would just get to a ball and just be like, wow, like that He was just longer and just had that first jump and could get there. And there are numerous steps between here and the NBA, but and of course the athletes get better and all that kind of stuff, but he will too. I mean, he'll get better too. So there's a lot to like there. I don't see him, just from what I've seen, as being somebody he's not so physically dominant like you and I have talked about Ayton a fair period of time, where with somebody who can be dominant against everybody. I think he's going to be more somebody who has to figure out how that fits in, with better surrounding talent. but the tools are there. Absolutely. No questions asked. And I'm excited to see what he can become, because some guys, and this is going to be, about effort, because even after you make it in the NBA, you still have to work really, really hard, is where does he choose as his calling card outside of the physical ability, and can he execute that? Because, the way that the jump and his length and all that kind of stuff, you go, okay, I can do something with this. It's just that it has to actually happen.
And then the last guy that's worth talking about is Dante. He is at Sunrise Christian Academy, considered a top 10 prospect in the class of 2020. He was the youngest player in attendance, and that showed pretty regularly. But he's also 7 foot with a 7'7" wingspan, reportedly, and that also shows, because he's a good athlete. He is a big body that I'm a little bit worried about continuing to grow a little bit too large for the next level, given what we want from centers now at the NBA. But just the way his length affects things on the floor, and he has great hands, he has great touch. He looks like a guy that, I wouldn't be shocked, just given his age, if he would reclassify to 2019, I guess that would be, so he can get to the NBA a little bit quicker, just because he is the age to where he could get to the NBA by 2020. At the end of the day, this guy is going to be an awesome prospect to watch at Sunrise.
He was striking, and
It
takes a lot for somebody in a setting like this to be that way, and you just saw him, really, wow. And they, unfortunately, he didn't get to play against Bassey very much, which I would have enjoyed, even though he's bigger. But yeah, he was able to create space for himself on the glass at certain moments. He had some good recovery plays, which I liked. It's not necessarily, I wouldn't call it a strength in his game at this point, but you think about what a guy with his physical ability can become. It's pretty impressive. And I didn't see it. Did you see a ton of his jump shot? I don't remember thinking it looked bad, but I don't remember being like, oh man, this guy can stroke it.
Oh yeah, I don't think he's like a shooter right now. That's fine though.
No, it doesn't have to be. No, not everybody has to be what Mo Bamba was at the Hoop Summit a couple of years ago, and he wasn't stroking it either. He was just making some.
Right.
That was more Wendell Carter that was making a fair amount of them.
Right. But overall, this is a great event. A couple other guys that I think are worth mentioning again. Joel Parra, 6'7", 6'8", power forward from Spain. He's already gotten a couple games in the ACB level with, I believe he plays for Juventud. So that's a guy worth tracking. Philip Petrushev is going to Gonzaga. He's at Montverde Academy. He was, I would say, okay during the event, not amazing. Tyrese Samuel out of Canada. He's a guy that was 220.
Oh yeah, he was good
on the 24/7 Sports composite coming into the event. He is going to rise up that after this event. He was really, really solid. Other than that, I think that's about all we needed to cover there. This is always a great event to go to, just because you get an early look at some of the guys who are going to be either long-term prospects at the NBA level, at the high school level, at the college level, or guys who are going to be NBA prospects coming up through the international professional ranks.
Sure, and I think there was a stat, because it was great they took those guys to the Rising Stars game, that because it's now the USA versus World format, that I think something like half of the World team had played in Basketball Without Borders camps when they were on their way up, and that gives you a sense. I mean, there are a lot of different Basketball Without Borders camps. A couple guys had gone through the global one. But yeah, it was a good time, and I'm sure it was a great opportunity for them as well. And they got coaching. They got coaching from NBA players, from WNBA, and there was a girls' camp going on at the same time. And so they had all this talent around, and coaching players like Fisher was there, and a couple other. I thought it was. I'm assuming it was a great opportunity for them as well.
They also got a hell of a get off my lawn speech from Gary Payton on Sunday that you missed. It was
nice.
It was legendarily get off of my Lonnie, and eventually he started to move into talking about Wendy's. It was if someone got video of this speech, I just looked at one of my friends there. I won't out him just because it's a little bit negative, but we looked at each other. We're just like, where is he going with this? And it was one of those things, and I have to wonder what these international kids were thinking, listening to Gary Payton talk about so many kids now, they don't try and they just shoot threes all day, and sometimes you got to play your game and try and shoot mid-range twos. And I was like, oh God, oh my God. Danny, please tell the people where they can find your work.
Podcasting Dunked On Basketball podcast with Nate Duncan. That's, except for this week because we're taking some time off, weekdays. And Real Jam Radio once a week. Sam is on it frequently. And then writing, The Athletic, Sporting News, Real GM, and whoever else will publish my work.
A lot of people do publish Danny's work. He's really great. Please go subscribe to the Game Theory podcast on iTunes. We are, trying to move up the ladder. Anytime that you guys leave a rating and review, that helps that matter. So please go on ahead and do that. Go subscribe to The Athletic as well. Keep me employed over there. We'll be back later this week. We'll talk some NBA draft stuff with Cole Zwicker. We have a lot to talk about with Trae Young just because Cole and I talked to Cole on Saturday about Trae just for a preview, and it went on for like 20 minutes. So it'll be a really good conversation, I think, there. Until next time, though, we'll talk soon.